Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Motshwanetsi. I'm Motshwanetsi, and today we're talking about sustainability agency, integrity, dignity, values, and all the things that matter to us as young people, that matter to us as Africans. And we are joined by, obviously, a friend of the podcast, Thabani Mlilo, and a beautiful lady who I just met today. I love you, by the way. Just so you know. Alex Motshwanetsi, Mathole. How are you, lady?
Great to be here. Loving the energy. Loving the energy.
I'm so nervous, by the way. I've been acting like I'm okay, but I'm just like, oh my God, sorry, ma'am. I promise you.
Loving the vibe.
Thabani, like I said, you are, a friend of the podcast, and you told me about V20, and you and Alex are both part of this incredible initiative. But I'd love to start with you, Alex. Just give us a background of who you are and what V20 means to you and the role that you play in it.
Lovely. I'm the co-lead of the sustainability or sustainable development advocacy stream within the V20. The Values 20 initiative, which is really a stream of the G20, or runs parallel to the G20, is really looking at how do we promote societies that are values-led. And so I fit in within that frame that says, how do we leverage values to help us have much more sustainable communities, sustainable businesses, and communities. I'm also the founder and CEO of Just Things Advisory, which is a governance, risk, and compliance advisory business. And so the V20 initiative kind of tags quite nicely with what I've done over the past 27 years. I have a deep passion around having more fair societies. For me, the concept of fairness is very important. Concepts of equity, concept of justice. And so talking about values actually falls quite nicely within that frame. So the V20 is really, and being involved around sustainable development is not a new thing, but it is a continuation of a passion point.
Yeah, and you, Thabani, I mean, you've always just been for as long as I've known you, just been a champion of sustainability. And now just listening to Alex talking about, values and how that's integrated. So, I mean, your role with V20 and how that fits into your mission in this life.
Yeah. So thank you again, and it's good to be back. Yeah, so this has kind of been a confluence, really, I feel, of everything that I've done up to this point. I feel so privileged to be part of this work, part of this movement, co-leading with Alex. I'm learning so much. And really what it's done is it's brought to life in a very tangible and public way some of those concepts that I've kind of embodied in some of the work that I've done, or tried to embody in some of the work that I've done and the impact that I've made. So it's really been an honor to be part of that. It's a continuation of a journey for me, and so the hope is to multiply that impact within this space, and start and catalyze and provoke some of the thoughts from a ground roots level around what values and values-based leadership actually means for us, what it should mean for us, and how it takes our society forward.
I mean, given this, Alex, listen, I love the idea of a values-led nation and organization. But I mean, are these just buzzwords that we're using? And how is V20 pushing to transition from just these buzzwords to actual policy involvement and decision making?
Fofana, if you think about it, societies, and it does not matter whether it's in Africa or elsewhere in the world, have historically been founded on systems that were values-led. Systems of doing good, systems that focused on doing no harm. That has been part of the evolution of humanity. I think we find ourselves in an era where with industrialization and then moving on to the 21st century, there is so much that has happened that I think part of our own evolution as humanity, we have lost things that have contributed to our success. Sure. And so I don't necessarily think that values is a buzzword. I actually think it's an opportunity for us to use the phrase reset. Reset and go back to basics. Basics around the type of philosophies that contributed to the success of humanity, that catapulted the revolution that we've seen, that have brought us to this place where we're able to have these amazing innovations, where there is globalization, where there's knowledge exchange, information flow, people moving between regions. So we need to be able to say, therefore, what are the good things that brought us to where we are as humanity, and what happened along the way? So for me, it's really the conversation around values within V20. It also allows us, as I say, to reflect around the good things that come from our legacy around values and morals-based societies, but also to reflect around the weight of the past. Yeah. Because it's not always been positive values. Remember, there are positive values and there are values that are corrosive. So for me, it's really that opportunity to kind of reflect around those. So I don't think it's a buzzword. I think we will do ourselves a lot of injustice if we have a conversation around sustainability, we have a conversation around development, without reflecting around what drives human choice. When you unpack the key drivers of human choice, often it has to do with value propositions. The things that we value inform the decisions that we make. So for me, I think that it is timely for us to reflect around that as people.
Yeah, I love that approach. And Thabani, Alex said something so profound. She said, what happened along the way? And that's my question to you. Where was the disconnect with organizations, with government? Where did the disconnect happen from, especially when it comes to the expectations that we have as people within the organization, as the people who look up to government to lead us? So, what happened along the way? What do you think it was?
Yeah, I think part of the disconnect, and I think some of the frustration that really surfaces around the conversation around values is that disconnect between what we say and what we actually do. And so I think there's been a lot of focus on the perception or the viewing, the outside images of doing good, etc., without it being embedded in factual, consistent delivery of values, and actions speaking louder than words, as it were. And I think particularly in my context around the youth are looking at this and they're saying, we talk about sustainable development and we say that we want to create, we say that the youth are, the leaders of tomorrow, and they're the ones that are going to do this and this for tomorrow, and we've got to look after the youth. But at the same time, we're making decisions around our environment, around our planet, without the youth, and doing it in such a way that is going to negatively impact the youth. And so that disconnect about what we are saying and what we're actually living, I think, causes a lot of frustration. And I think it's just an eroding of values and a focus on self. I think it's a focus on image rather than of substance. And I think that's kind of where it's broken down.
Yeah, and like when you're talking about the youth, it's very frustrating for me because as a young person, it always seems as though things are happening at us and not with us or have us in mind. And then oftentimes I've wondered what that is. And, oftentimes it seems as though we're part of the decision making. You'll have the token young person or the token young person in certain organizations. And when you see their length of or the bandwidth which they're awarded, it's very limited. And I've also often wondered what that is, and if it's a systemic thing, like you were saying earlier, that maybe, there were bad values. And I'd love for you to maybe touch on that, Alex, when you mentioned the negative values. I never thought of values being negative at all, to be honest with you. And it seems very simplistic in nature, but we struggle, I think, as humanity to live it and live through positive values, especially at a governance and organizational level.
One of the things that comes to mind, I'm going to phrase it first with a positive value. We grew up in our communities with the principle of Ubuntu, Basotho say Botu, which talks to humaneness, but that also talks to I see you. And as I consider my interests, I also consider your interests. Ubuntu says, I will not go out to deliberately exploit your vulnerabilities. Those are the type of values we grew up with. Now, the fact that they are philosophical values does not necessarily mean everybody lives by them. But I think what has happened over the years is that we've had a very individualistic way of looking at things. And it doesn't mean that thinking about your own personal interest is necessarily wrong. Let's understand that. You need to be able to see yourself and then to see others. But for me, the negative side of being individualistic is when it is always about you, when it's always about me, to the exclusion of the damage that are caused to others. And so I think that the way in which our societies are structured, our economies, generally, we're seeing a lot of individualistic ways of doing things. I think materialism, consumerism has had its upside in terms of supporting growth, but with it, I think in some areas, that level of materialism has not been coupled with the same level of responsibility. And I think it's a call for us to recalibrate. So those are some of the negative aspects that I think are coming through and are having a direct impact in terms of sustainability. Where initiatives are not coupled with that sense of responsibility around how do my actions impact on my children? How do they impact on the next generation? How do we impact on the youth? Do our value systems allow us to hand the baton in a way that ensures that they will succeed, or at least gives them a better chance of succeeding? And I think that reflectiveness, that ability to pause and say, my organization, if I look at it 10 years from now, how do I want it to be? If I take 20 to 50 years, none of us can predict that far, but certainly be able to have that scenario type playing in our own minds around the future. And I think that becomes important, particularly when it comes to the youth, to realize that I cannot look at my own success and ignore the successes or my responsibility towards my grandchildren, let alone my children, my grandchildren. And I think we need that type of way of thinking.
Thabani is agreeing with you so fervently. I want to know what you have in mind.
Absolutely, and I love what Alex has said, and it just brought to mind something that's very linked to sustainable development and sort of environmental, people, planet, and all of that. And that's around this concept of boundaries. So, and boundary systems. So, yes, I can be individualistic in terms of how I want to, what drives me, but there is a boundary where my individualistic exploits should do no harm. Right, there's context in which we develop, and so there has been a narrative around whether Ubuntu, for example, is something that everyone should embrace. Well, I would say some of the corporate crises that have happened globally, if there'd been that concept of Ubuntu, would have been avoided. So we have many examples, the Enrons, some of the scandals that have happened in this country with certain corporates, If that principle had been embedded, and if that was the if it was a values-based leadership that had Ubuntu in the frame, I think some of those things would have been avoided. So it translates throughout society. I mean, we are talking about corporates a lot, but it really transcends sort of organizational dynamics in the formal way into how we do life in society.
Yeah. Talking about value-based leadership, Alex, you've worked in regulatory governance roles, etc. What would you say, from your observation and experience, would be the most overlooked or misunderstood aspect of value-based leadership, especially within the sustainability aspect of it?
You know, I was listening to a podcast.
And it wasn't mine, by the way.
And immediately after, I heard a speech recently by the Prime Minister of Singapore, Prime Minister Wong, on the 8th of April, and he said something, I want to read it. He says, familiar signposts are fading, but the contours of a new global system have yet to take shape. We are in a period of transition, uncertain, unsettled, and increasingly unstable. Now, why I cite that is that the world, by its very nature, is always guaranteed of change. And I think it becomes very important to have a mindset that is agile enough to embrace change. So you talk about the regulatory and the governance environment. I think that the frameworks that we have, for instance, were informed or had the right intentions. But at times when you have ultra regulation or over regulation or regulation that is it's too rigid. What happens, and it's intended to drive sustainability, or guidelines that are too rigid, you actually end up on the opposite end. And so my reflection around governance and managing regulatory risk is that it becomes very important to be able to calibrate, not to end up with a system that has lax regulation, because that has other intended consequences. You look at the 2008 global financial crisis, which was unsustainable practices on steroids. But to be able to find that middle ground where we have a lot more balanced, and that requires us to always challenge the way in which we are doing things in each era. If you look at the changes that are taking place now globally, all of us need to go back and say to ourselves, have these practices served us well? Have the current global framework served us well? Have the current risk and compliance practices served us well? So I think that it's not just a reflection position from nation states. I think every profession, every industry needs to go back and say, as we chart a new future that is very uncertain, what must we let go of? Were there practices and frameworks that were clothed under the banner of sustainability that actually led to unsustainable practices? Were there? Where are practices promoting reciprocity? Ubuntu is about reciprocity.
That's right.
Did we have those embedded? So I think that across all of those areas of governance, risk, and compliance, change presents an opportunity. We have an opportunity to say, what should the new normal look like? Not everything that we've done in the past has not worked. There are great things that have happened over the past decades. But we obviously, what has brought us this far is not what's going to take us to the future. And I think that all of us, irrespective whether your business, your individuals, your professional bodies, all of us need to go back and say, what is the future? What does the pull of the future demand us to do today?
Yeah. And Thabani, I mean, speaking of this future, I mean, now, as we're talking about this value-based leadership, and who's going to be deciding what these values are? Who is it, and how are we going to avoid some level of moral elitism that I think she was talking about back then, that was a disservice to so many of us?
Yeah. I think what's really interesting about the values conversation is the fact that we're not reinventing new things. Society is society, people are people. The nature of people is the nature of people. There's negative tendencies that we have as humanity, and there's very sort of altruistic, very positive things that we have. And so this is around norms and values and the embedding of those things that serve society the way that they should. So we talk about value proposition. Well, if in the past there were things that took us in a way where we're very individualistic. I mean, I think about warmongers like Attila the Hun, and that era of people, that warlike, take what you want attitude was what served the people at that time. If we look at where we are now, there are things that we need to look and say, what is the future that we want to create? And what are the values, norms, actions, and activities that take us to the future that we want? Is individualism, the lack of reciprocity, is that what takes us forward? And I think us as society, we need to define that. And for me, this is where I will refer to one of the values that we have is around ownership and agency, and actually challenge the youth. Challenge the youth. It's your tomorrow. I will still be here. Us who are young at heart, we're there. We can guide. We're young at heart, but I think there's what I wouldn't want is the youth to just feel like they are at the mercy of systems and processes that are beyond them. There is ownership and agency that must be taken. There's disruption that youth are known for. There's challenging and asking these questions that's important. And I think through that questioning, through these conversations, through these dialogues, and maybe through storytelling of what's worked and what hasn't worked, I think that starts to bring in and entrench those norms that are important. If I just think very quickly around, and Alex, you spoke about Singapore, and you know that it was a massive cultural shift in Singapore, and a lot of that was on the back of a future they wanted to create, and the storytelling and narratives around shaping perspectives and shaping social change, directing social change in a very organic way that took them to where they are as a successful nation. And I think we need to look at those examples around what future we want to create and to channel ourselves there. And the youth has a big part in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, do you want to chime in on that? She was just looking at you with such great admiration.
I think Thabani has actually said it so profoundly, in the sense that agency and ownership dictates that, like the youth of 1976. For all of us, and that's all youth across the world, in their own different contexts, to say, we have a voice, and to be able to access all platforms that are available to be able to articulate that voice. It's lovely when doors are opened, and the door says, come in and have your view. But where I have observed the youth exert themselves and have their voice heard is where they have actually demanded to be heard, and they have swung new doors. And I think, for instance, it's absolutely amazing that this podcast is actually hosted by a young person. And that, for me, is agency. The youth in our era are so powerful and so dynamic. Their knowledge and understanding of tech, their knowledge and understanding of platforms, the ability to influence, the ability to interact across geographies. It's just so much further than we've had. So I do think that there's that opportunity that Thabani says, that talks about to be able to create these places and marketplaces of dialogue and conversation. Because when this is multiplied, it starts getting into the mainstream. It is on there sides of the main conversation that if you gain enough momentum and there's enough voice, that will move to the mainstream. And I think the youth must continue to agitate in a positive way around that, particularly the type of values that are important to crafting your future. And values are contextual.
Yes.
They are not, it's not one or the other.
Yeah.
There are values that are specific and relevant to a particular context. So the youth have a great contribution there.
Yeah, I mean, Thabani, you were talking about storytelling, and sometimes I often wonder, if corporates and even governance understands the value of storytelling when it comes to shifting mindsets. And can you just touch on that briefly? Because you did talk about how storytelling is such an important part of sharing what values are. I mean, back then that's what we used anyway, just not with the podcast medium.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think stories and storytelling and shift are part and parcel of narrative shifting. I think there's a false dichotomy around profit versus values, or positive values. A lot of young people like gangsters, Al Capone. Like there's an appeal to I don't want to say lawlessness, but disruptors who disrupt systems. And so, but we know that just in how life normally happens, we know that ethical leadership really is linked to profitability. In fact, going back to some of the examples that I gave, with ethical leadership, I think some of those crises could have been averted. And so some of that storytelling is around the known narratives. That's storytelling, telling kind of how what sparked off an Enron, what sparked off a Steinhoff, what sparked off all those things. That storytelling becomes part of your risk assessment in a very formalized way, and you start to understand like where do we need to get to. The format of storytelling in the old traditional ways was not just storytelling for the sake of storytelling. It was to purvey certain values or norms that you wanted to embed or entrench in the society. And I think the same should be happening at a corporate level, or should be happening in sort of an organizational way, where we've got really good news stories, good news narratives, but we also have the bad ones, and we need to decide as corporates, as a boardroom, which way we want to go in terms of the journeys, given the risks and the landmines that are beset corporate entities in any case.
Yeah, Alex, and I'd love for you to answer this as honesty. Nothing, it's not controversial. It's just, you know what, I'd like value-based leadership sometimes, and I mean, it often kind of seems like with certain organizations, where it seems like a branding exercise. How do we sift between well-packaged, performative values and those that are genuine and well-intended?
I think that's such an important question, because it's something that I've been reflecting about. There isn't a single organization or institution, whether state or otherwise, that doesn't have values. Actually, you spend your time and you look at different websites, everybody has that set of values. It's about integrity, it's about fairness, it's about equity.
Yes.
And so I think the fact that people are positioning themselves that way says one thing, that everybody recognizes that it's important. Yes. But there's a saying that says, and by their fruit you will know them.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I said amen.
And by their fruit you will know them. And I think that it is in looking at the outcome. It is really looking at the outcome of organizations, of even individuals. It is really when you look at the outcome that you can objectively say whether those values are lived or not. But I think that it becomes very important that those who are placed in positions of responsibility become acutely aware that it is not the values that are written on paper that are the values.
Yeah. Wow.
The values are the ones that you walk.
Oh, wow.
We can have them plastered around boardroom tables or at home, in churches, wherever that place may be. But the values that those who follow you will live are the ones that they see the leadership live. And importantly, it is what? The values that we reward. It is the values that we punish
Yes.
that say what are the real values that we will live by. So I think all of us have an opportunity to really reflect quite deeply around. It's very easy to say I'm values led. It's very easy. But the reality is when you look at the outcome, what does the outcome say? And the reality is that when we talk about values-based leadership, we're not talking perfection. Any system that's led by any human being, you are guaranteed that it's flawed. It's in the nature of humanness, that nothing will be perfect. But values-based leadership says, I will do what is right. And when I fail, not if I fail, and I think it becomes important for us to accept that things will fail. Okay, that they vary in the level of failure. Some is public, some is private. But when things do fail, values leadership is also around how I respond. It's around that I take ownership, that I take accountability, that I'm responsible, that I'm responsive, and I'm transparent. So I think the conversation around values, we should not oversimplify the complex.
Yeah.
Values are very complex. It's not one-dimensional. It is multidimensional, and the context matters. But it's around being able to understand that these values operate as an ecosystem. And at different points, you need to be able to pull different sets. And together, they then give us something that's holistic. And the one other comment that I wanted to make is a reflection on what one captain of industry said. You know, there are values that we have in an organization. And this concept where people think you can have an island of good in a sea of evil. I generally just struggle with that. Because at some point, the sea is going to cover the island. But he was saying, you know, in organizations, you know, you can do your best, for instance, in that values-led organization to empower your people, to create opportunities, to focus on equality and equity. But he then said to me, but Alex, it becomes problematic when in a country you have such high unemployment. And he says, but what you don't realize, and this for me was the shifting moment. He said to me, a child who has been denied the opportunity to see their parents work may be very intelligent, but what that denies them is the opportunity to see somebody execute diligence. You know, when this leader said this to me, I thought, when we talk sustainable development, when we talk values, when we talk about a better future for all, leaving no person behind, we have to take a systems-based view.
Yes.
Because unless you see, he was able to see the connection. He was able to say, you know, everybody's talking about, you know, we expect these people to be productive. I had never personally connected, you know, concern somebody saying the young person is unproductive. It's not because they don't want to. They think people are coming out of university, they're highly qualified, but they can't do. It is not because they don't want to at times. It is because the high levels of employment have denied them the exposure, the exposure that they need to be able to do that. So what am I getting to? The problem is complex. It requires a multifaceted approach, and it requires closer collaboration, coordination, and knowledge exchange between different stakeholders in society. Values is a state issue. Values are a corporate issue. They are a communities issue. They're an individual issue. They're a family issue. And it is when you have that conversation that I think you can make meaningful impacts.
Sure. That was heavy, Alex. That was heavy. I mean, Thabani, just listening to this, one may even argue that trying to even implement value-based leadership in organizations that are just so fast-paced and they're trying to make decisions and trying to keep afloat and trying to, work through every day you search on the news, there's something new, the Western world, things that they're doing dictating us in the side of Africa. So, I mean, is it really that important, or is it a matter of saying it's going to slow, what if I feel like it's slowing us down from the decision-making process?
And I think this is to answer your question as well, but almost in a roundabout way. I think that's part of what our mandate is as the V20, is to say there's all this complexity. There's all these moving pieces. We can't make some of those shifts overnight. We can't make some of those shifts by legislating, good behavior. We can't, put out directives or just, say there's a budget item in the budget for youth development. We can't just, at the snap of our fingers, just make those shifts. I think our mandate is around for us to even just start by having these conversations and being real and transparent in the journey that we're on around the importance of values, and to provoke some of these conversations. And I think by the very nature of these conversations and this and the dialogue, corporates are part of our society. Organizations are part of our society. Institutions are part of our society. And by that fact, they need to be part of these conversations. And it needs to be a systematic way of changing and making those shifts. But it starts by having some of the hard and uncomfortable conversations initially.
I mean, what bold steps do you think organizations should start making now?
I've had the great privilege of working with some amazing leaders. And I believe that there are amazing people out there that are doing the right things. But I think we need to lift the tide. They say the lifting tide lifts all the ships. And so I think it's about, and that's just the beauty of something like the V20, where we have a platform where all stakeholders, and it's important not to say just organizations as in corporations, but all stakeholders in society to really start having these conversations that are very realistic about what is our actual current values that we prize. Because what part of it is that in mapping the future, it's important to reflect on your history. Without understanding your history, you are very likely to go back and repeat it. And we should not underestimate the power of history. History has weight. So I think we need to have this platform that reflects around, whether it is in our own organizations, in families, or even in broader society, around really, if you look at who we are, not our professed values, but what exactly, what do we value? No, really. What do we value? And I go back to, what do we value? What do we prize? What do we recognize? Those things. And then also look at the flip side. Look at the mirror honestly about what are the things that we do, that we value, that have had negative unintended consequences, and engage both. And then start reframing, the future. And I've seen some organizations do it internally. I mean, in a corporate setting, people go in and say, we need to do a culture risk assessment. And there are ways that some organizations, some people can do a culture risk assessment purely because it's the right thing. It's a nice thing to say, I did it. Okay. But there are others who say, what, I actually want to understand what is my lived culture. Because values translate into culture. And so I think, to the question, I think there's an opportunity for all organizations to really do that, institutions, even in families, to say, but really, what is the lie of the land? And am I happy with the lie of the land? And define what future should look like. And then understand what are the things that I need to do to get to that future. And also to have, in that process, to be kind enough to ourselves to understand that change takes time. When you've had, for instance, a corrosive value system that results in a culture that is destructive, that is a dystopian culture, to undo that is going to take time. So I also think that, you know, there are a number of things that need to happen across multiple stakeholders, and it just can't be one individual, but a multi-pronged approach.
Alex said that, say that values lead to culture or contribute to culture.
Yes.
Thabani, looking at the people, the individuals, the respective individuals within V20, how have you seen their positive values contributing to the work culture that you have within the
Oh
organization?
my goodness. It's I think it's been quite wild for me. It's been wild. I mean, I had a phone call from Tabia, which ended me being here. I've spoken to Priya. You know, we've had these conversations internally. It's incredible because it's people that are there, not because of any remuneration or any, you know, recognition. It's there because they understand that the platform that we operate is an opportunity for us to shape. And so it's become really incredible. The collegiality that's there, the challenging that we have there, we're not perfect by any means. But these are individuals that are committed, that are ethical, they're principled people that are driving this work, and it's just been a joy to be part of it.
Yeah, I mean, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that we've also done as the advocacy group is go out and look for partners,
Yes.
people who share similar values, who really want to contribute to the conversation. And for me, one of the most profound things have just been seeing how willing individuals are. And you know, at times we can get into this mode of negativity that kind of sees the world as all jaded.
Yes.
But it is when you see and you engage with individuals and you see the effort that has gone in across different organizations, business schools, professional bodies, just companies, individuals. I think for me that's probably one of the most amazing parts of this V20 initiative. To be able to connect to a wider network of people that are not driven because there is personal financial gain, but because there is a belief that as humanity we can do better, and that all of us in our different ways, in our different corners, can contribute, and everyone's contribution can create something bigger and create that tide that lifts the boat. So for me, I'm excited that you agreed to host us. and that talks to just value and willingness to partner in champions. So lovely stuff.
Absolutely.
I'll say this maybe as rounding off what Alex is saying. I think a lot of the impetus and the energy that comes from doing this work is because it's anchored in hope. It's anchored in, people may not see some of the dynamic things that are happening on the ground roots level, where you've got a decision that you need to make and it's a values-based decision. It's either this or that, and people are making the right decisions. We tend to become overburdened by the negative, but I think sometimes if you allow the light to shine, if you allow the hope to shine, actually that's how we come together. That's how we recognize that this movement can be a lot more powerful if we do it together. And I think that's part of our mandate.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate about this conversation, beyond just understanding the complexities of value-based leadership, is understanding that there's a work that's happening and we're not lost and there is hope, like you're saying. And the beauty about what you're saying is that you're also saying all of us have a part to play. And I appreciate that so much. So, I mean, in closing, what would you say I'd love for both of you to answer this, what you'd say you're most excited about when it comes to V20 and what mandate it is that you're trying to push?
I'm excited that Africa can add its voice to the global conversation around the value system that we think is going to chart us to a better future for us and our children. I think that the G20 is in South Africa, on the African soil, and the V20 similarly allows us an opportunity to contribute to the conversation. I'm excited that as part of the V20, there'll be a communique that goes out, well-researched piece in terms of the role that values should play. I'm also excited that we've taken a view in South Africa that it's not going to be a one-year thing, because I think that can be the discouraging part. You know, when people believe that these conversations take place because there's an appointment in October. What excites me is that it's a longer term, conversation. South Africa has taken the view that we will continue with the work that we are doing for the next 3 years. So this year is around creating consciousness and conversation and dialogue around values. But for us, what success looks like is how, getting to a place where we start embedding these things in different parts of society in a more concrete way. And I'm happy to be part of an initiative that just it's more than just talking. There's clarity in terms of this is where we want to go, and we're shaping how we're going to go there.
Beautiful.
I think for me, and you know this about me, I am at heart a storyteller. I am at heart, I love stories, and I love the impact of stories and how these narratives shape our societies, and moving things from the head to the heart. This is a very long distance here, as short as it looks, but stories help catapult that there. And so there is an unearthing that we're doing as part of the V20 of these stories that are seldom told, of people that may seem obscure to the public, but these things are happening in the rural areas next door. They're happening in Dar es Salaam. They're happening in Addis Ababa. These stories in the African context are there, and just the unearthing of those things, I think, is just going to be profound in terms of moving that narrative of values-based leadership. It's what as Africans we've been doing. It's going back almost to the ancient ways that worked. There's some ancient things that didn't, but there's some ancient things that worked, and it's sort of unearthing that in a modern context. And we're starting to hear from the youth, unearthing some of these youth stories. So I'm excited to see some of what comes out of that, the communique, but there's also going to be other communications and other stories that surface.
I did say an hour just goes so fast.
You did.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for this conversation. It's just been such a whirlwind for me, and both of you are such incredible partners. And I'm really excited about the future. And I think you've also both instilled something within me, a sense of agency, which is also one of your values as well, and also appreciating the value of storytelling. And I'm excited to hear the feedback. So any closing words before we wrap up?
We can influence the world, and we should seek to do that. But ultimately, the locus of control is within.
Yeah.
So, all of us need to use this moment in history and every day to really reflect about who we are, the type of values that should define us, and the type of futures that we would like to see for ourselves. And contribute in conversations, have our voices heard in places that matter, and where we have those opportunities to be able to share our part so that we can be part of creating a better future for all.
Beautiful.
I can't top that.
You really can't.
So I'm going to say peace. That's it.
That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you all so much for watching. Looking forward to receiving your feedback. And thank you once again. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. See you next time.
out.